The dust storm had been raging for 3 days when Alex finally got the signal to move out. Red sand whipped across the barren landscape like angry spirits, and the sky looked like it was bleeding. This wasn't his first time on a dead planet, but something about this place felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to whisper secrets, or how the ruins looked like they were reaching up toward heaven. Alex wiped the sweat from his forehead and checked his equipment one more time. As the lead researcher for the Colonial Survey team, he'd seen plenty of abandoned worlds. Most of them told the same sad story. People came, tried to build something beautiful, and then had to leave when things went wrong. But this planet, designated as Kepler-4 to be in the official records, had a different story. At least, that's what the history books said, according to every document he read. This world had been home to 50,000 people 100 years ago. When their sun started acting up and the climate began to collapse, the government swooped in like heroes and saved everyone. Every single person got evacuated to safety. It was supposed to be one of the greatest rescue missions in human history. But if that was true, why was Alex finding so many things left behind? Walking through the ruins of what used to be a thriving colony, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were too many personal items scattered around, children's toys buried in the sand, family photos still hanging on walls that hadn't completely fallen down, even kitchen tables still set for dinner. These weren't the signs of an organized evacuation. These were the signs of people who left in a hurry, or maybe people who never got the chance to leave at all. His team had been working on this site for 2 weeks now, carefully documenting everything they found. The official mission was simple: catalog the ruins, take some pictures, and file a report. But Alex was starting to think there was more to discover here than anyone expected. The building they were exploring today looked like it had been some kind of command center. Thick concrete walls had protected it from the worst of the storms, and inside, they could still see computer terminals and communication equipment. Everything was covered in layers of dust and sand, but underneath, Alex could make out the shapes of a world that had been abandoned in the middle of ordinary life. His scanner started beeping as he walked through what looked like a small office. The sound was different from the usual signals, sharper, more urgent. Alex followed the beeping to a pile of rubble in the corner where part of the ceiling had collapsed. Something metallic was buried underneath. Working carefully with his brush and small tools, Alex began clearing away the debris. His teammates were busy in other parts of the building, so he worked alone, letting the rhythm of the work calm his mind. Brush, scrape, little by little. Something started to emerge from the rock and dust. It was small and rectangular, hanging from a chain that had somehow survived the centuries buried underground. As Alex cleaned it off, he could see it was made of metal, tarnished and corroded but still intact. It looked like the kind of identification tag that soldiers used to wear, with information stamped into the metal so it wouldn't wear away. Alex had found plenty of artifacts in his career, but something about this one made his hands shake slightly as he worked. Maybe it was the way the metal felt warm despite being buried for so long, or how the chain seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. He told himself he was being silly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this small piece of metal was somehow important. Using his finest brush, Alex carefully cleaned away the last of the grime. The letters were faded and hard to read, but as they became clear, Alex felt his heart start to race. He cleaned more carefully, checking and double-checking what he was seeing. But no matter how many times he looked, the words stayed the same, stamped into the metal. In clear block letters was his own name, Alex Chen. Alex dropped the brush and stared at the tag. This wasn't possible. There had to be some mistake. He'd never been to this planet before. His family had no history with the early colonies. He'd been born on Earth, grown up in the city, gone to school, and chosen to become an archaeologist because he loved solving puzzles from the past. But he'd never been part of the past himself. He looked around the ruined office, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The equipment looked military. There were star charts on the walls and communication logs scattered across the floor. This had been some kind of command post. Maybe the last place where people had tried to coordinate a rescue. That never came. Alex picked up the dog tag again and held it up to the light. The metal was definitely old, weathered in a way that couldn't be faked. The stamping was deep and clear, done with the kind of equipment they'd used centuries ago. And the name, his name, was definitely real. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe there had been another person with the same name who lived and died on this world, long before Alex was born. But as he looked at the tag, Alex felt a strange connection to it, like he was holding a piece of himself that he'd never known existed. The wind outside had died down, and the building was quiet except for the sound of his teammates working in other rooms. Alex slipped the chain over his head and felt the weight of the tag against his chest. It felt right somehow, like it belonged there. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Alex knew he should report the find to his team leader, log it in the official record, and move on to the next artifact. That's what he'd been trained to do. But something told him this discovery was different. This wasn't just another piece of history to be cataloged and filed away. This was personal. As he gathered his equipment and prepared to leave the ruined office, Alex took one last look round. The dust motes danced in the afternoon light, and for just a moment, he could almost imagine what this place had been like when it was alive. People working at these desks, making decisions that would affect thousands of lives, fighting against time and impossible odds to save a world that was already dying. And somewhere in that history, there had been another Alex Chen, someone who had worn this tag, who had stood in this same room, who had faced the end of everything with courage and determination. Alex touched the tag through his shirt and felt its warmth against his skin. Whatever the truth was, he knew his life had just changed forever. The question was he ready to find out how? Walking back toward the main camp, Alex felt the weight of the tag with every step. Behind him, the ruins of the command center stood silent in the fading light, keeping their secrets for another day. But Alex knew he'd be back. He had to be, because somewhere in this dead world was the answer to a question he'd never thought to ask. Who was he really? And why did his name belong to a place that had died 100 years before he was born? 3 weeks had passed since Alex found the dog tag, and he hadn't slept properly once every night. He'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the metal chain around his neck. During the day, he tried to focus on his regular work, but his mind kept drifting back to that ruined command center and the impossible discovery he'd made there. His teammates had noticed the change in him during their final days on the dead planet. Alex had been quiet and distracted. He made excuses to avoid their usual evening conversations and had spent most of his free time walking alone through the ruins. When they'd finally packed up and left the planet, Alex had looked back at the surface one last time, knowing he'd return someday. Now he was on New Geneva Station, the largest research facility in the outer colonies. The station was a massive structure that spun slowly in space, creating artificial gravity for the millions of people who lived and worked there. It was home to the most complete archives of human colonial history, and if Alex was going to find answers about the dog tag, this was the place to start. The colonial archives occupied an entire section of the station. Row after row of data storage units stretched out like a metal forest, containing the recorded history of humanity's expansion into space. Alex had been here before for other research projects, but this time felt different. This time, he wasn't just looking for information about the past. He was looking for information about himself. Alex started with the obvious searches. He pulled up every record he could find about Kepler 440b, looking for any mention of evacuation procedures or casualty reports. The official story was exactly what he'd read before. 50,000 people successfully relocated to other worlds. When the planet's star became unstable, clean, efficient, heroic. But Alex had learned to read between the lines during his years. As a researcher, he knew that real life was never as clean as official reports made it seem. So he dug deeper, looking for the small details that might tell a different story. The first crack in the official narrative came when he found the supply manifests. According to the records, The government had sent enough transport ships to evacuate maybe 20,000 people. Where had the other 30,000 gone? Alex cross-referenced the ship logs with the population records and found massive gaps. That didn't make sense. Then he found the communication logs from the final months before the evacuation. The messages from Kepler-44b grew more and more desperate as time went on. Colonial administrators begged for more ships, more time, more resources. The responses from Earth were increasingly cold and bureaucratic. Words like acceptable losses and resource optimization appeared more frequently in the official correspondence. Alex felt sick as he read through the files. The truth was becoming clear. There had been no heroic rescue mission. The government had saved whoever they could afford to save and abandoned the rest. 30,000 people had been left behind to die when the planet's climate collapsed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Alex found when he searched the military service records. It took him 3 days to gain access to the classified personnel files. Alex had to use his research credentials and call in favors from colleagues who worked in military archives. But finally, he managed to access the service records for the Kepler-44b Defense Force. The file was there, buried in a database that hadn't been updated in decades. Service record for Communications Officer Alex Chen, assigned to the Kepler-44b Colonial Defense Unit, date of birth, service number, medical records, performance evaluations. It was all there. Alex stared at the screen, his hands shaking as he scrolled through the information. The photograph showed a face that was identical to his own, but wearing a military uniform he'd never seen before. The dates were all wrong. This Alex Chen had been born 30 years before Alex's actual birth date, had served in a military unit that Alex had never heard of, and had been stationed on a planet that Alex had only visited for the first time. 3 weeks ago, according to the file, Communications Officer Alex Chen had been one of the soldiers who'd stayed behind. During the evacuation, his last recorded duty was maintaining the communication array that sent the colony's final messages to Earth. The file ended with a simple notation: killed in action during the final defense of the Communicat Ion facility. Alex pushed back from the computer terminal and walked to the observation deck. Through the massive windows, he could see the stars scattered across the darkness of space. Somewhere out there was the dead planet where he'd found the dog tag. And somewhere in that planet's history was another version of himself who died defending people, who'd been abandoned by their own government. The rational part of Alex's mind told him this was all just an impossible coincidence. Maybe his parents had named him after a relative he'd never heard of. Maybe the resemblance in the photograph was just a trick of old imaging technology. Maybe there was some simple explanation that he wasn't seeing. But deep down, Alex knew that none of those explanations felt right. The dog tag round his neck seemed to grow heavier every time he thought about it. Sometimes, late at night, he'd find himself touching it and experiencing flashes of memories that weren't his own. The smell of burning electronics, the sound of incoming artillery, the weight of responsibility for lives that couldn't be saved. Alex spent the next week diving deeper into the archives, following every lead he could find. He discovered that the evacuation of Kepler-44b had been kept secret for decades. The families of the people who'd been left behind had been told that their loved ones had died in transport accidents or equipment failures. The truth about the abandoned colony had been buried under layers of classified documents and official lies. But Alex also found something else. In the final transmissions from the planet, there were technical reports about the star's collapse patterns, detailed scientific data about stellar instability that had been gathered by the people who'd been left behind to die. That information had been quietly used by colonial planners to predict and prevent similar disasters on other worlds. The sacrifice of the 30,000 people on Kepler-44b had saved hundreds of thousands of lives on other colonies. Their deaths had meaning, even if the government had never publicly acknowledged their heroism. Alex found himself wondering about the other Alex Chen, the one who'd worn the dog tag before him. What had his final days been like? Had he known that his work would save other worlds? Had he chosen to stay behind, or had he simply been unlucky enough to be assigned to the wrong place at the wrong time? The more Alex learned about the abandoned colony, the more questions he had about his own life. Why did he have the same name as someone who lived and died centuries before he was born? Why did the dog tag feel so familiar when he held it? And why did he sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with the taste of smoke in his mouth and the sound of emergency sirens in his ears? Alex knew he needed help to find the answers. The archives had told him what had happened on Kepler 440b, but they couldn't explain the impossible connection between his life and the life of the man who'd worn the dog tag before him. For that, he needed to talk to someone who understood things that couldn't be explained by normal science. As Alex prepared to leave New Geneva Station, he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find Dr. Elena Vasquez, the physicist whose theories about time and consciousness had been rejected by the scientific community. She was considered crazy by most of her colleagues, but Alex was starting to think that maybe crazy was exactly what he needed. Because if the dog tag had taught him anything, it was that the universe was far stranger and more connected than anyone wanted to believe. And if there was even a small chance that Dr. Vasquez could help him understand what was happening to him, then it was worth the risk. Alex touched the dog tag one last time before heading to the transport bay. Soon, he'd have answers. He just hoped he'd be ready for what those answers might reveal about who he really was. The journey to Europa took Alex 3 days, and during that time, he couldn't stop thinking about what he was about to do. Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't just controversial, she was practically a legend. In the scientific community, some people called her brilliant, others called her completely insane. Most scientists refused to even acknowledge her work existed. Alex had read her papers during his university years. Back when he was young and curious about everything, her theories about time and consciousness had seemed like science fiction then. She wrote about parallel realities, quantum connections between minds, and the possibility that consciousness could exist in multiple timelines at once. Her colleagues had laughed at her ideas, and eventually, she'd been pushed out of mainstream academic circles. But now, sitting in the passenger compartment of a transport ship, with a 200-year-old dog tag round his neck, Alex wasn't laughing. He was desperate for answers, and Dr. Vasquez was the only person he could think of who might take his story seriously. Europa was one of the small research colonies built inside the ice shell of Jupiter's moon. The colony was home to scientists who worked on projects that were too dangerous, too expensive, or too strange for the main research stations. It was the perfect place for someone like Dr. Vasquez to continue her work away from the judgment of her former colleagues. Alex found her laboratory in the lower levels of the colony, in a section that most people avoided. The hallways were dimly lit and filled with the hum of experimental equipment. Signs on the walls warned visitors about electromagnetic fields and temporal distortions. Alex had no idea what most of the warnings meant, but they made him nervous. Dr. Vasquez was smaller than Alex had expected, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. Her laboratory was a maze of strange machines and computer screens displaying equations that hurt Alex's head to look at. She listened to his story without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes on a tablet. When Alex finished talking, Dr. Vasquez asked to see the dog tag. She examined it with instruments that Alex didn't recognize, running tests that made the metal glow with different colors. Alex watched nervously as she worked, afraid that her equipment might damage the only connection he had to the mystery of his identity. After an hour of testing, Dr. Vasquez sat back in her chair and looked at Alex with an expression that was equal parts excitement and concern. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working on temporal theory for 30 years, but I've never seen anything like this. The metal isn't just old. It's existing in a state that shouldn't be possible." Alex felt his heart racing. "What do you mean?" Dr. Vasquez pulled up a display on one of her screens, showing a three-dimensional model that twisted and folded in ways that made Alex dizzy. "Time isn't linear like most people think. It's more like a river with many branches, Sometimes, when something traumatic happens, it creates what I call a temporal schism, a split in the flow of time that creates multiple possible realities. She pointed to the model, highlighting the separate paths that seemed to spiral around each other. The evacuation of Kepler-442b was one of those traumatic events. In one timeline, the evacuation succeeded, and everyone was saved. In another timeline, it failed, and 30,000 people died. Your dog tag exists in both timelines simultaneously. Alex stared at the screen, trying to understand what she was telling him. But that's impossible. How can something exist in two different realities at once? Quantum mechanics, Dr. Vasquez replied, as if that explained everything. At the subatomic level, particles can exist in multiple states at the same time. What I've discovered is that consciousness, the part of us that makes us who we are, follows similar rules under extreme circumstances. A person's consciousness can become entangled across multiple timelines. She turned to look at Alex directly. The Alex Chen who died on Kepler-442b wasn't just someone who shared your name. He was you, in a different timeline. And this dog tag is the connection between your two versions of reality. Alex felt like the room was spinning. So you're saying I died on that planet? In one timeline, yes. In another timeline, you were never born until centuries later. The dog tag is bleeding through from the failed timeline, drawn to you by what I call quantum consciousness, the part of your mind that exists beyond normal time and space. Dr. Vasquez walked over to another machine and began adjusting its settings. This is why you've been having those memories that aren't yours. The closer you get to understanding the truth, the more the two timelines want to merge. Your consciousness is trying to reunite with itself. Alex touched the dog tag through his shirt, feeling its familiar warmth. Is that dangerous? Very, Dr. Vasquez said, not looking up from her work. When timelines converge, they create what we call a temporal cascade. Reality becomes unstable. People, places, even entire worlds can be erased from existence if the process goes wrong. She turned back to Alex, her face serious. But there's something else you need to know. The Alex Chen who died on Kepler-442b didn't die in vain. His final transmission contained crucial scientific data about stellar collapse patterns. That information was used to predict and prevent similar disasters on dozens of other worlds. Because of his sacrifice, hundreds of thousands of lives were saved. Alex felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. So he was a hero. He was, and in a way, so are you. The fact that you found the dog tag, that you're here now seeking answers, it's all part of the same story. The universe has a way of correcting itself, of making sure that important things don't get lost. Dr. Vasquez showed Alex another display, this one showing energy readings from the dog tag. The temporal displacement is getting stronger. Soon, the two timelines will either merge completely or tear each other apart. If they merge successfully, you'll retain memories from both realities. If they tear apart, both versions of you could be destroyed. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. What can I do to stop it? There's a theoretical process that might work, Dr. Vasquez said, pulling up more equations on her screen. But it would require you to return to Kepler-442b, to the exact location where the other Alex Chen died. You'd have to use experimental equipment to create a controlled temporal bridge between the two timelines. She paused, looking at Alex with concern. The process is completely untested. It could kill you. Or worse, it could trap you between realities forever. But if it works, it could stabilize both timelines and allow you to exist as a complete version of yourself. Alex thought about everything he'd learned. The abandoned colony, the government cover-up, the hero who died defending people nobody cared about. He thought about the memories that weren't his own, the dreams that felt more real than his waking life, and the strange sense that his entire existence was somehow incomplete. If I don't do this, Alex asked, what happens? The temporal instability will continue to grow. Eventually, it could affect more than just you, your timeline, your family, everyone you've ever known. They could all be erased when the cascade reaches critical mass. Alex closed his eyes and tried to imagine a world where he never existed. where all the people he cared about were gone because of a cosmic accident. That started with a dog tag found in ancient ruins. The thought was unbearable. How long do I have to decide? Dr. Vasquez checked her instruments based on the energy readings. I'd say you have maybe a few weeks before the cascade becomes irreversible. After that, the choice will be made for you. Alex opened his eyes and looked at the dog tag one more time. Somewhere in the quantum foam of reality, another version of himself had made the ultimate sacrifice to save people he'd never met. Now it was his turn to make a choice that would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone he'd ever loved. I need to think about this, Alex said. Dr. Vasquez nodded. I understand. But remember, you're not just choosing for yourself. You're choosing for both versions of who you are. And for everyone whose lives depend on the stability of your timeline. As Alex left the laboratory, he felt the weight of the dog tag heavier than ever. In a few weeks, he would have to decide whether to risk everything on an impossible journey back to a dead world, or watch helplessly as reality itself began to unravel around him. The choice was his to make. The question was, which version of himself would make it? Alex returned to his small apartment on New Shanghai Colony. With Dr. Vasquez's words echoing in his mind, the journey back had taken to days. But it felt like a lifetime. Everything looked the same as when he left, his books on the shelves, his research papers scattered across the desk, the half-finished cup of coffee he'd abandoned weeks ago. But nothing felt the same. The apartment that had once been his safe haven now felt like a prison. Every familiar object reminded him of the impossible choice he had to make: save his timeline and risk everything, or watch helplessly as reality crumbled around him. Dr. Vasquez had given him experimental equipment packed in 3 heavy cases, along with detailed instructions that read like a recipe for disaster. The first few nights were the worst. Alex would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the dog tag's weight on his chest like a countdown timer. The memories that weren't his own were getting stronger. Sometimes he'd wake up thinking he was back on Kepler 440b, surrounded by the desperate faces of colonists who'd been abandoned by their own government. Other times, he'd find himself standing at his window, looking out at the city lights and remembering the taste of recycled air and the sound of incoming artillery. During the day, Alex tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. He went to work, filed reports, and pretended to care about his regular research projects. But his colleagues noticed the change. His supervisor, Dr. Kim, called him into her office after a week of distracted behavior. Alex, what's going on with you? She asked, genuine concern in her voice. You've been different since you got back from the Kepler mission. Are you feeling okay? Alex wanted to tell her everything. Dr. Kim had been his mentor for years, and he trusted her completely. But how could he explain that he was living into timelines at once? That he'd found proof of his own death on a planet that had been abandoned centuries ago? She'd think he was having a breakdown. I'm fine, he lied. Just tired from the research trip. Dr. Kim didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Take some time off if you need it. That's what vacation days are for. Alex nodded and left her office, knowing that vacation time wasn't going to solve his problems. He had less than 2 weeks before the temporal cascade became irreversible, and he still hadn't decided what to do. That evening, Alex sat in his living room with the dog tag in his hands, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The metal was warm to the touch, and sometimes he could swear he felt it pulse like a heartbeat as he held it. More memories flooded his mind, memories of the other Alex Chen. The one who died defending a communication array on a world that nobody cared about. He remembered the fear in the colonists' eyes when they realized the evacuation ships weren't coming back. He remembered the weight of responsibility, knowing that thousands of lives depended on keeping the communication systems working. He remembered the final moments when enemy fire had torn through the facility and he'd used his last breath to send crucial scientific data to Earth. But these weren't just memories anymore. They were experiences as real and vivid as his own life. Alex could feel the other version of himself reaching across time and space, trying to complete something that had been left unfinished. The hero's work wasn't done yet. Alex got up and walked to his computer, pulling up the files he copied from the Colonial Archives. The data that the other Alex Chen had died to protect was scattered throughout dozens of technical reports, information about stellar collapse patterns, planetary evacuation procedures, and early warning systems that had saved countless lives on other worlds. Reading through the reports, Alex began to understand the full scope of what his other self had accomplished. The sacrifice on Kepler 440b had led to the development of new technologies that could predict stellar instability decades in advance. Entire star systems had been evacuated safely because of the knowledge gained from that terrible disaster. But there was more. Hidden in the technical data were clues about temporal mechanics that scientists of that era hadn't understood. Information about quantum consciousness, parallel timelines, and the connections between different versions of reality. The other Alex Chen had been gathering this data in his final days, somehow knowing that it would be important for reasons he couldn't comprehend. As Alex read deeper into the files, he realized that his discovery of the dog tag wasn't an accident. The other Alex Chen had been preparing for this moment, to centuries in the future. He'd embedded quantum signatures in the metal, creating a beacon that would eventually call out to the version of himself that existed in a different timeline. The dog tag wasn't just a connection between two realities. It was a message, a plan, and a responsibility all rolled into one small piece of metal. Alex felt a strange sense of peace as he understood what he had to do. The choice had never really been his to make. From the moment he found the dog tag in those ruins, his path had been set. He was meant to return to Kepler 440b to complete the work that the other Alex Chen had started, and to bridge the gap between two timelines that were never meant to be separate. But understanding his destiny didn't make the fear go away. Dr. Vasquez's equipment came with no guarantees. The process could kill him, trap him between realities, or worse, it could succeed but leave him fundamentally changed. The Alex Chen who returned from Kepler 440b might not be the same person who left New Shanghai Colony. Alex thought about his life, the people he cared about, and the simple pleasures he'd taken for granted. His morning coffee, his work, his quiet evenings reading research papers. If he went through with this plan, he might never experience those things again. But if he didn't, those things would cease to exist entirely when the temporal cascade reached critical mass. The next morning, Alex called Dr. Kim and requested extended leave. He told her he was working on a personal research project that might take several weeks. She agreed, though he could hear the worry in her voice. Alex spent the following days putting his affairs in order. He paid his bills, organized his research notes, and wrote letters to his family and friends that he hoped they'd never have to read. He also studied Dr. Vasquez's equipment, memorizing every detail of the procedure he'd have to perform on Kepler 440b. The experimental device was about the size of a briefcase, packed with components that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. According to Dr. Vasquez's instructions, Alex would need to set it up at the exact location where the other Alex Chen had died, the ruined communication facility where he found the dog tag. On his last night in the apartment, Alex stood at his window looking out at the city, millions of people going about their lives, unaware that their entire reality hung in the balance. Alex touched the dog tag and felt the familiar warmth. But now it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift. The other Alex Chen had died alone, surrounded by strangers, fighting for people who'd been abandoned by their own government. But he hadn't really died alone, across time and space. Another version of himself had been waiting to complete the mission. The hero's story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new chapter. Alex packed his equipment and booked passage on a transport ship to Kepler 440b as he prepared to leave everything he'd ever known behind. He felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. He was about to attempt something that had never been done before, something that could either save the timelines or destroy them both. But for the first time since finding the dog tag, Alex felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The choice was made, the path was clear, and all that remained was to walk it to whatever end awaited him on a dead world, where heroes were born and legends were made. Tomorrow. He would return to Kepler 4 for to be. Tomorrow, he would discover whether he was brave enough to be the person he was meant to be. The transport ship dropped Alex off at Kepler 4 for to be just as the twin suns were setting over the dead landscape. Red and orange light painted the ruins in colors that reminded him of fire, and the wind carried the same whispers he'd heard during his first visit. But this time, Alex wasn't here as a researcher documenting the past. He was here to become part of the story himself. Alex carried Dr. Vasquez's equipment across the barren ground toward the communication facility, where everything had started. The 3 cases felt heavier than they should have, as if they were weighted down with the gravity of what he was about to attempt. Every step brought back more memories that weren't his own, until Alex could barely tell the difference between his own experiences and those of the other Alex Chen. The ruined building looked exactly as he'd left it weeks ago, but now Alex saw it through different eyes. This wasn't just an archaeological site anymore. It was the place where a hero had made his final stand, where crucial data had been transmitted to save other worlds, and where one timeline had ended so another could begin. Alex set up the equipment in the same room where he'd found the dog tag. According to Dr. Vasquez's calculations, this was the exact spot where the temporal schism had occurred. The quantum echoes of the other Alex Chen's final moments were strongest here, creating a natural bridge between the 2 timelines. As Alex assembled the device, his hands moved with a familiarity that surprised him. Part of him seemed to know exactly how the equipment should be configured, even though he'd never seen anything like it before. The other Alex Chen's technical knowledge was bleeding through, helping him prepare for a procedure that neither version of himself fully understood. The device looked like a metal ring about 3 feet across, covered in components that hummed with barely contained energy. Dr. Vasquez had explained that it would create a controlled temporal field, allowing the 2 timelines to merge, without causing a cascade that could destroy both realities. At least, that was the theory. No one had ever tested it before. Alex checked his watch. According to Dr. Vasquez's calculations, the optimal window for the procedure would occur in exactly 1 hour, when the quantum fluctuations between the timelines reached their peak. Until then, all he could do was wait and try not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Sitting in the ruins of the communications center, Alex felt the weight of 2 lifetimes pressing down on him. He could remember growing up on Earth, going to school, choosing archaeology as his career. But he could also remember being born on a colony world, joining the military, and falling in love with a woman whose name was lost in the chaos of evacuation. Both sets of memories felt equally real, equally true. The dog tag around his neck was growing warmer, pulsing with an energy that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. Alex pulled it out and held it in the fading light. The metal was glowing faintly, now responding to the approaching convergence. Soon, it would either complete its purpose or destroy everything it had been meant to protect. As the hour passed, Alex found himself thinking about the people he left behind in his own timeline. His family, his friends, his colleagues who had no idea that their entire reality was balanced on the edge of a knife. If this went wrong, they would simply cease to exist, erased from history as if they'd never been born. But if it went right, they would continue living their lives, never knowing how close they'd come to oblivion. Alex also thought about the colonists who died on this world centuries ago. 30,000 people who'd been abandoned by their government, left to face the end of their world with nothing but courage and determination. Their sacrifice had been hidden from history, their heroism buried under layers of official lies. But their deaths had meaning, and soon that meaning would be complete. The device began to emit a low humming sound as the convergence window approached. Alex took his position in the center of the metal ring and activated the sequence Dr. Vasquez had programmed. Energy fields crackled around him, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with potential. As the temporal bridge formed, Alex felt reality begin to shift around him. The ruined communications center flickered between past and present, showing him glimpses of what this place had been like in its final days. He saw technicians working frantically to maintain contact with Earth, soldiers preparing for a final defense that everyone knew was hopeless. and families huddled together as their world died around them. But Alex also saw something else. He saw himself, the other Alex Chen, standing at the communication console as enemy fire tore through the building. The other Alex was sending the final transmission, the scientific data that would save countless lives on other worlds. As he worked, he was also doing something else, encoding quantum signatures into the dog tag he wore, creating a message that would travel across time to find the version of himself that existed in a different reality. The two timelines began to merge, and Alex experienced both realities simultaneously. He felt the pain of the other Alex's final moments, but also the satisfaction of knowing that his sacrifice would have meaning. He felt the terror of being abandoned on a dying world, but also the pride of standing with people who refused to give up hope. In that moment of convergence, Alex understood that identity wasn't just about the choices he made in his own life. It was about all the choices he might have made, all the paths he might have walked, all the versions of himself that existed across the infinite possibilities of time and space. The dog tag wasn't just connecting to timelines, it was connecting all the different ways Alex Chen could exist. The process reached its peak, and for a brief moment, Alex felt like he was everywhere and nowhere at once. He was the archaeologist who'd found the dog tag, the soldier who died defending the communication array, and every possible version of himself that had ever existed or could ever exist. The boundaries between different realities dissolved, and Alex became complete in a way he'd never imagined possible. Then the energy fields collapsed, and Alex found himself standing alone in the ruins of the communications center. But he wasn't the same person who'd entered the temporal ring. He carried memories from both timelines now, the weight of two complete lives that had finally become one. The dog tag around his neck was no longer glowing. Its purpose was complete. It had guided Alex across time and space to this moment, where two versions of the same story could finally find their proper ending. The hero hadn't died alone after all. He'd just been waiting for the rest of himself to catch up. Alex looked around the ruined facility one last time. In his merged memories, he could see it as it had been in its final days, full of people fighting against impossible odds, refusing to surrender even when their own government had abandoned them. Their courage had made all of this possible, and their sacrifice would never be forgotten again. As Alex prepared to leave Kepler-4 for the final time, he felt a sense of peace that he'd never experienced before. He was still Alex Chen, the archaeologist who loved solving puzzles from the past. But he was also Alex Chen, the communications officer who died defending a world full of people who deserved better than they got. Walking back toward the landing site, Alex touched the dog tag one more time. It was just metal now, no longer carrying the weight of two timelines. But it would always be special to him, a reminder that every life contains infinite possibilities. And sometimes the most important version of ourselves is the one we thought we lost forever. The transport ship was waiting to take him home, back to a timeline that was now stable and secure. Alex had saved his reality, but more importantly, he completed a story that had been waiting 100 years for its proper ending. The hero's journey was finally complete.